Welcome back, everybody. It's hard to believe, but we're already in week 9. And this week we're going to start a conversation, a 2-week conversation on video surveillance systems. So security cameras, essentially, but they make up an entire system. The camera is only one part of the system. We're going to talk this week about how these systems work and the different components. And then next week we'll talk about design when it comes to video surveillance systems. But let's talk a little bit about expectations here. So we're referring to these as video surveillance systems, or VSS, and it's not CCTV. People always say, well, we have CCTV. Very seldom anymore does anybody have CCTV. Now, your small, self-contained gas station, convenience store might have a CCTV. The difference is that a video surveillance system is on a network. So, for instance, your Ring doorbell is not a CCTV camera. It is a VSS camera. You can access it from the internet. You can access it from someplace else, off of a cell phone, a laptop. If you can access it without a hard wire running from whatever device you're looking at, right? If there's not a hard wire running from your cell phone back to the system, then it is a VSS. A CCTV is on a dedicated backbone. And there are places where CCTV is necessary. Some very, very high security places may have a CCTV simply because they want no one to be able to look at that system from the outside ever. But even those are few and far between with the protections that are available now. So first order business, we're talking about VSS, not CCTV. You'll hear people, and you'll even see job descriptions that say, must have experience with CCTV. It's because it's written by an HR person that really hasn't kept up with the technology, but again, very few places have CCTV. They're very much reactive in nature. So, you're not going to normally use your camera system to take a positive step. It tells you something. It detects, right? It may deter. Oftentimes if someone's going in to rob someplace and they look around and they see cameras hanging all over the place and they don't know where they go, they may decide this is not a great target. So there could be some deterrent factor, but for the most part, it's detection, and detection is reactive in nature. Something trips, an alarm trips, it detects, right? And it's reactive, then you do something with it. So, but they really don't delay, right? Not like a fence would delay. They certainly don't defend, and they don't necessarily deny, right? So, manage the expectations when it comes to VSS, that really it's a reactive tool. Now, video analytics may make them a little bit more real time. You could have video analytics put into your camera systems and into your VSS that will tell you when something is moving and what it may be, whether or not the person that's on the camera has anything in their hand that the analytics would recognize as a weapon, those types of things. But again, they're still reactive. It's giving you information that you must react to. And then most cameras are not monitored. You'll see cameras all over the place, and there's just this mental thing that tells you that somebody is watching you on camera. The camera is watching you, and it's normally going to a recorder, but very seldom is anyone physically looking at that same camera that you're looking at when you look up and see one as you walk around in stores and on streets. They're unmonitored, and if they're unmonitored on a CCTV backbone, then somebody could just take it. Right, on a networked VSS system, if somebody steals the camera, you wire them such that you would know that, right? The movement of the camera, the disconnection would alarm to you. But on a CCTV backbone, that's very seldom available to you, and somebody could just steal that camera. So an unmonitored camera really is a strictly after the fact kind of thing, and you never know whether the thing that's being stolen is the camera itself. So as part of the reading this week, there was a very short article on the evolution of cameras, and I think it helps you understand VSS systems a little better when you look at the newness of them. Everybody in this class, with the exception of me, has grown up with cameras all over the place looking at you. It's really just part of the landscape, if you will. But cameras are a relatively new security tool. And in fact, we're talking about, 1970s, 80s, and 90s. 90s being probably the heyday of when cameras were really starting to come into full use for security purposes. But they really started with entertainment, right? Motion pictures, right? The silent movies of the 1920s was really the beginning of the motion picture camera, and the motion picture camera being the beginning of the surveillance camera at some point. And beginning use was strictly military. You would not find cameras being used for any type of civilian security purpose. It was definitely military. Now, when the VCR came along, before that you used actual tape, reel-to-reel type film inside the camera box. So, excuse me, the old grainy photos you see of things like the Patty Hearst bank robberies of the I think it was the 70s, right? Check my facts on that. I think it's the 70s. But that's a very famous case because the heiress to a multi-billionaire newspaper magnate joined a radical group and was seen robbing banks. There was some question as to whether she was coerced and kidnapped or whether she joined, and I think eventually everybody decided that she just joined out of her own free will. But there are pictures of Patty Hearst, and if you look up those pictures of her robbing a bank, they're very grainy. The old grainy bank film. It really hasn't gotten any better in some cases. That's because of settings that banks use sometimes. But when VCRs came along and the VCR tape came along, that really brought cameras into the forefront, and places started to use cameras, at least one single camera, to enhance their security. I have been in rooms. GlaxoSmithKline is the one that comes to mind in North Carolina. They had a VCR room at one point that was probably 50 by 100, full of VCRs, individual tapes, and they had 2 or 3 people whose job it was to just keep changing tapes. After the VCR kind of came out of favor because you needed one VCR for every camera, a multiplexer came along, and a multiplexer is the thing that allows the camera to split. So when you look at a screen and you see multiple cameras on a screen, like the Zoom screens, right? Each one of you has your own little block. That's basically the look of a multiplexer, and security cameras were able to split screens and have multiple cameras on one screen and through one tape, and you could record them on one tape that way. The DVR came along, and you probably are all somewhat familiar with TiVo from when you were in your teen years and maybe even a little before. Was one of the early DVRs where you could record TV shows, and now network video recorders. And when you when you save something, if you have cable or even when you tap into your Roku, you're actually going to an NVR, a network device that holds the video and it streams it back to you. And that really moved us to VSS, and the networked video recorder especially opened up the system to network access. So DVRs and VCRs were on those CCTV closed backbone systems, but the VSS kind of opened it up to a network system where you could view it from anywhere. And the reading's going to tell you more on that, but read that short article. I think it's kind of interesting, but I think the takeaway from that, please, is that cameras have not been around. They're not like alarm systems that have been around since the early 1900s, where you could trip the alarm and at the bank and the bell would go off. Camera systems are really new to the security industry in terms of comparisons to other types of devices. And in such a short time, from the 90s to now, in a 30-year span, the cameras and their capabilities have just really blown up. But you'll also see that they're not as advanced as you might think they are, simply because we're kind of catching up, right? There's military use, and then there's industrial use of these cameras, and we're really just catching up. So read that history because I think it's interesting, and just understand that this is relatively new stuff. So there are some basic types of surveillance cameras that go into a VSS, and you all are probably pretty familiar with a fixed camera, and a fixed camera is just that. Is it a single lens? Normally a single lens. You can have multi-lens fixed cameras, and we'll see some of those in your reading when you go to some of the websites I recommend. The single lens is pointed at a single thing. It doesn't move. You can't zoom in. You can't change anything. You're just looking at that one thing, and that has its purpose. Don't kid yourself. That's not an old style camera. Fixed cameras have a very useful purpose. There's the pan tilt zoom, and it does just that. Panning, meaning it moves back and forth. You use a joystick and you just move the camera around, and the actual camera moves inside the housing on a little motor, and then you can tilt it up and down, you can pan back and forth, and you can zoom in and zoom out. You can't put motion sensing technically on a pan tilt zoom camera all by itself, and the reason is that the camera itself is moving. It would pick up its own motion, and therefore you can't just sense something that's moving. But there are some new cameras that I'll show you how they combine technologies. And one of those is a 360. So what it does is it has a device built into it that will monitor activity all the way around it, be it heat or movement or however type of sensor you put in it. And when one of those sensors trips, it spins the PTZ, the pan tilt zoom camera around, and goes to right where that movement was picked up by its sensors and zooms in and gives you a picture of what is causing you problems. And it does that in milliseconds. It picks up movement along a fence line of something, and the camera zips along, zooms right in, goes right there, and you see that there's a rabbit or a deer or a person against your fence line. And then now the big thing, especially for internal cameras, but there's some great external uses as well, is the fisheye lens camera. Fisheye lenses have been around for a long time. They're the wide angle lenses. And when you look through a wide angle lens, things look very distorted, right? As you get to the edge, it just kind of stretches out the picture, and so it's kind of funky looking. The new security cameras that use fisheye have the built-in processor that when the camera will pick up everything around it through that very, very wide angle fisheye lens. Call it fisheye because if you looked at a fish, the eye sticks out a little farther so they can see all the way around. And then the camera itself has a dewarping processor in it. It goes to a multiplexer, the thing that will split it into different sections, and then dewarp it so that it looks like a regular camera shot, even though what it's picking up originally is that fisheye look, right? That really warped kind of look to it, like the picture's bent. It has a dewarping feature in the camera that will make it look like a standard picture and give you a clear image. So those are really the four types that you're going to see. There are certainly hundreds more, but just about any application that you have in a security function right now can use one of those types of cameras. The fixed comes in different housing types, at a bubble housing, a bullet housing, but it does the same thing. It points at one place. Pan tilt zoom comes in different sizes, and the motors are a little different. Some have heaters in them for cold weather and things, but these four are really the ones that you're going to see mostly used in security. So let's look at some of those old cameras and look at the evolution. And some of these old ones, you're going to still, when you get to your first workplace, you're going to see some of these on the wall. Especially one that I'll show you here in a second. And so don't be surprised, but these are quite old, some of them. So a very old taped-based video camera. There is a coax going in and out of this one. So I'm not quite sure what they're doing here, because I do believe that video camera actually holds tape. And by tape, I mean reel-to-reel type tape. It's an old bank camera style. But it looks like somebody may have adapted that one a little bit. But this is a fixed camera. You won't see too many in this housing anymore. But it's just a standard fixed camera that used tape to record, and you would go and open that up and pull the tape out of it and put a new tape in. And they were used in banks primarily for decades, starting in the 1960s probably, for banks. But that's about the only place you'd really use them, because they were so labor intensive to have to go and change things out at the site there. So you wouldn't see these used in a big factory, because you'd have to have somebody going around and changing tapes constantly at the camera itself. So these are the old fixed cameras. You won't see too many of these in use today, but now you can understand if you have to go to each one of these to change the tapes out, right? To change the reel-to-reel movie film out of them. Can you imagine if you had these in a big factory, you'd have 2 or 3 people all day that were going to do that, because these, even on time lapse, the film can't be reused. Check that. It can't be taped over. You have to go get it processed in order to reuse it. So you were constantly going through film. Not very practical. That's why they were used in bank branches, where a small branch, and to more deter, in my opinion, than to detect. They didn't detect much. They just recorded what happened so that you could play it afterwards, get some clues as to who robbed you. But they would deter people from robbing banks because they didn't want to get caught on the film. Now this camera is the next stage up, if you will, and it's another stationary camera. This doesn't move. This is a fixed housing. You can see on the side of it here a bolt that bolts it onto this mount. And you have different types of mounts. We'll go over those next week. But this is a Pelco camera, and not real new by any stretch, but it definitely got the job done. And these Pelco cameras were everywhere, and you will still see them everywhere in these housings. These are analog cameras. They're not digital. So they go back to a tape. You can now put a um, translator, if you will, on them so that they can be digitized and you can put them on a network drive and view them. But for the most part, they were analog cameras that went back to a VCR or a DVR to record. Pelco had this market wrapped up. And that's why you'll see this housing with the word Pelco on the side. They had a single factory in Fresno, California that put these out. They were huge on quality. I toured their factory in the probably late 90s, early 2000s, and they threw away more cameras than they actually sold because they wanted them to be perfect. And in that, seeking perfection in the manufacturing process is why you will still see a lot of these cameras out there, because they are almost indestructible. They just never really burn out. Very seldom does the camera go. The wiring will go and the lighting may go, but the camera itself, they just keep on ticking. To the detriment of many security managers who would like to see these old things go because they don't have a great picture anymore, with all the new technologies we have. But you will see a lot of these in your first job, no matter where you go. In Pfizer, I still have these hanging off of buildings in some places, and we spend a fair amount of money on our surveillance equipment. But if they're not broke, you don't fix them, you translate them back, and they have their purpose. But in an industrial setting, oftentimes, especially outside, you need to be looking at more than one thing in more than one direction. And in this case, we have hung fixed cameras off of a pole in 3 different directions. And the reason we put them all on the same pole is we only have to run power up that pole to these cameras in one place and run the cabling down in one place, right? We could put them on individual poles. Unfortunately, the power that these cameras run off of is not the same level of power it takes to light that street light that they're hanging on. And so you have to have a transformer. And in order to save money, you will see in some old applications 3, 4, 5 cameras hanging off the same pole, so they could save on the power supplies when they put them up and route the cabling through one place, right, inside the pole and down, and then through a single conduit back into their building. But you can imagine how if you needed to look 4 directions and you needed to do it every, say, 500 feet in a very large application, you'd have these trees with cameras hanging off of them like this all over the place. Not a very efficient way to do it. So they needed a way, first off, to get cameras to work well outside, right? Because outside it gets dark. You can't always turn the lights on and make them bright enough. And then you had to go different directions. So 2 things really came about with camera technology. First one was the introduction of an infrared light sensor, which here is separate from the camera. In the ones that were on that pole there, I think there were infrareds built into those. Probably were, looking at the vintage of them. But when infrared first came out so that cameras could be used outside in low light, this is what they looked like. The infrared would light the area enough from the bouncing back of that infrared into the camera lens so that it looked like pretty close to daylight. Now, the one thing that you would find was that colors would not do well in infrared light. So during the day, if I'm walking around and this camera's picking me up and I'm Brian in a green shirt, at night, if you had a color camera in here, it would look like Brian in a red shirt. Much like we talked about the low sodium lights on the side of a building will wash colors out and change them. Infrareds in these old technology cameras would do the same. There was one manufacturer that actually built a camera. It was a much bigger box than the one you see here, and it had 2 cameras in it. One color for daytime and one black and white for nighttime, because they didn't want people to say the person I saw was wearing a red shirt when indeed they weren't, because the colors would be so bad. So it had a little light sensor in it so that when the infrared came on at dusk, right, picked up the light sensor, this came on, it changed from one camera to the other. It looked like a Canon because it was so big, because the cameras in those days were bigger. Now you had to fit 2 of them in a housing. And they tried to put the infrared sensors, onto the housing itself. It really looked like you had a gun turret on the top of your building. They weren't very popular. They were popular because the black and white was much crisper and clearer at night, and you didn't have to worry about the washed out colors that made things look funny. But from an aesthetic standpoint, they didn't go very far. But really what they needed was, from what we saw, the 3 cameras hanging on the side. They took care of the light issue, but they still had the idea of cameras looking, having to point a camera in each direction. So they came up with a multi-lens housing, which looked a lot like this artifact right here. So what this is no more than I believe this one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cameras, right? You count them right? Yep. Check that, 6 cameras. One going each direction. You see the lenses here on each side. And there are 6 different cameras and 6 different pieces of coax coming out of it. And you would connect those 6 to either 6 VCRs or to one multiplexer and then into the VCR, which is about the age of this. And eventually you could have put these into a DVR as well by plugging in all the coax cables into the back. But this was the way that you could look darn near 360 or at least 180 around a room, right? You could see everything in the room, couldn't see above, but you had individual cameras that pointed, and they didn't really stitch together. You had to look at individual pictures. So you had 6 of these on a screen and you were looking all different directions. You could have put 6 individual cameras up like we saw the 3 on the pole. This just looked like a better way to do it. And let me tell you, people were all thrilled when this came out because you could just use one housing, because security managers were starting to run out of places on ceilings internally in high security buildings to put cameras. It really looked like a hodgepodge when you have cameras pointing in every single direction. So this was something that was really new and unique, but it is kind of ugly. And it did really just give you 6 different pictures rather than a stitched together view, which really then gave us the original type of pan tilt zoom camera. So as you can see in this, you very seldom see them with clear housings anymore, but they always had clear housings. And this is on a motor, and someone with a joystick or a keyboard. At the time, you would use there's a 4-arrow keyboard that you used, and you would turn the camera and zoom in and turn it whatever direction you needed to go. And, the problem was solved. Sort of. Because there is a problem with pan tilt zoom cameras and your basic security needs. But this certainly replaced that 6-camera lens box that we saw hanging from the ceiling. And it also then allowed you to kind of stitch things together. You could go in a complete circle and look, and there were no blank spots from the different areas. So that is the very early pan tilt zoom camera, and you're probably most familiar with that type of camera because they're used quite a bit. And now they kind of look like this, and this is probably the most common camera you will see. This is a Axis, I believe this is a 3700 series. I can't tell whether this is a pan tilt zoom or a fixed. I believe it is a pan tilt zoom actually. It's kind of hard to see in this housing, but bottom line is that you will see these hanging all over the place because this is the most common design of camera that you're going to see, because you can spin around and you can see everything that goes on around you. No stitching together, single lens, relatively small, easy to operate, and because they are so commonly used, the price on these is really not all that high. You can get one of these for around $1,200, and then you have to pay for the installation and obviously the peripherals, which we'll talk about, the things you hook it to. But very commonly used camera, and the kind that you're going to see mostly, especially in internal use today. What you'll also see is an offshoot. In this case, this is a pan tilt zoom unit in here. So it spins around, it goes 360 degrees. It can see all over, right? And these are sensors, which may be individual cameras, much like that box we saw with the 6 in it, or they could be infrared sensors. They could be heat sensors, thermal sensors. They could be motion detection units. Whatever is happening around in that circle, it is looking out for quite a distance, and when it sees a change, right, a heat change, a motion change, whatever the type of sensor you have in there, it automatically spins this camera around to go there. So these are integrated with this, and it allows you to use motion sensing with a pan tilt zoom camera without special analytics, right? So people refer to these as UFO cameras in industry. You'll hear people talk about the UFO camera, and you'll see a lot more of these coming out now because they allow you to integrate your sensors, something that's picking up some anomaly, heat, motion, light changes, whatever you've got, whatever sensors you put in or whatever you've got them set to, and they automatically then turn the camera, point it to where the problem is, zoom in on it, and alert you that there's a problem. So it's becoming more and more popular to have these because the camera does the work for you. You don't have to be out looking for things. It alarms and tells you what it sees and what it's picked up on all the way around the camera in this case, with the exception of obviously if you're mounting this on a wall. And there are ways to pennant mount these up for a while, so you're only, you come out from the wall a little ways and you really can see all the way around. If you mount them on corners, you can see for quite some distance with these. And one more type that I just wanted to show you before we get into discussion about pan, tilt, zoom versus fixed is this camera, because this camera can be used in almost total darkness. This has the IR sensor built into it, and this particular housing does rotate, so it can be used to go 360 around to find things, but it can be used in almost total darkness. That has always been a problem for video cameras, right? This one has the technology that you would find like in a night vision scope built into the camera itself, so it can see long distances in total darkness. And I just thought I'd show you that one because it's kind of cool. So at some point in the very near future, many of you will get your first visit from your camera salesperson. They can act very much like a used car salesman if you're not careful, and some of them are some of my best friends in the world and do really great consulting work and help me with problems. So find a good camera salesperson that you trust and that's going to help you solve problems rather than just try to pad their wallet, and you'll be very happy. But almost all of the bad ones will tell you that pan, tilt, zoom is much better than fixed. And it's almost intuitive to think that, I can point the camera wherever I want it. So if I'm protecting a box of gold sitting on a sidewalk with a fixed camera, that's great. But if I can pan around, I'll be able to see if anybody's coming near it. I'll be able to see if somebody's pulling up with a truck that's going to try to, lift that box of gold. I can use that pan, tilt, zoom camera for more things than I can fixed. And that is true, that a pan, tilt, zoom does more than a fixed, but is wrong thinking that pan, tilt, zoom is automatically better than fixed. Camera selection is based on something called task and purpose. Okay? And we've talked about task and purpose before. Task and purpose in cameras is, what is the camera supposed to watch? And why is it watching that area? So the task and purpose for the camera, right, is the task is it's going to look at that box of gold. The purpose is to make sure that no one goes near it and tries to steal it. If you have a pan, tilt, zoom camera that's pointing at the parking lot behind where the gold is because you're looking around and someone goes and steals the box because you're not looking at it, have you met the task and purpose of the camera? And the answer is no. And I will tell you that it is so common when someone comes to you and says something was stolen or their vehicle was damaged in the parking lot. You get a lot of those from outside cameras. And you go and they are parked in the north end of the lot. When the accident or action or damage happened, the camera is always pointed at the south end of the lot. And oftentimes someone has parked it there. You can put pan, tilt, zooms onto their an automatic patrol if you want, and they will go and stop and zoom in on things, and you can program them to do 99 different actions on most of them. But a lot of times, once you use the joystick, if you don't put it back in patrol mode, it just sits where you used it last. And I can't tell you how many cases I have had where a pan, tilt, zoom camera didn't see what it needed to see because it was pointed the wrong way. Think of a pan, tilt, zoom like a guard. If they're looking the other direction, they're not going to see what happened. But if you've got them focused and they can't move their head and they're looking at one thing, they'll always catch it. So make sure you match the task and purpose with your cameras. And you're going to be asked to do that when we do our camera design. What is the task and what is the purpose of every camera, so that we can make sure that you've chosen the right type and the right application of cameras for that task and purpose. So when you're making that decision, PTZ or fixed, you really have to think of it this way. PTZ covers more area, right? It can spin around, see more. But it's likely to miss the event if it's panning on a schedule or if it's pointed the other direction and somebody parks it looking the wrong way. That happens a lot. Fixed has very little flexibility. Once it's set, you can't move it. And if it's integrated with an alarm or an event, so we haven't got much into integration yet, we're going to do that later, but one of the great things about cameras are you can program them in with your alarm system, perhaps, so that if an alarm goes off on your door, remember we put alarm contacts, let's say on, we put alarm contacts on the outside doors of our warehouse, and we have outside cameras, and they're looking around outside. You can program them that if someone trips the alarm on the door, it in milliseconds spins that camera around, zooms in, and says, what happened, right? So you have that flexibility with a PTZ that you don't have with fixed. Fixed is going to potentially tie into an alarm or event, but it's only going to show you what it was already looking at, right? It's not going to take that extra time to spin around. You have to have a camera for every event if you're going to do that. Now, fixed cameras, again, they're just error-free because you're always looking at the thing that you set it up for. Your task and purpose are always covered if you set up a fixed camera because nobody's going to move that and be looking the wrong way. And then PTZ, and this can happen with fixed, but less likely, but PTZ can have a big privacy problem. And I will tell you that one of the very first facilities that I was assigned to sat on pretty much on the campus of the University of Michigan. And there was a fence line between our facility and university married housing. And I got a complaint, or actually a call one time, just a gee whiz call from somebody in the apartments, the married housing apartments, that wanted to know if our cameras could see their apartment. And I think it was really, as I recall, and it's been some time, but as I recall, it was pretty, benign call. They were looking, they had something stolen out of their car or something. They wanted to know if our cameras covered it. But when I went back to look over video, which we really didn't need to look at unless we had a complaint, so I didn't look at it very much, I found that our guys on the early morning shifts used those cameras to peep into people's windows because they had pan tilt zoom cameras, and they were able to use those to zoom in on bathroom windows and bedroom windows. And it was quite an embarrassment. Quite a few people lost their jobs over it. And I had to go in, and you can actually put blocks over certain areas on these cameras. In the control devices back then, you could put squares over windows so that you couldn't look in windows. You could see the building, but the windows would be blocked out. And I had to go do that for all of those windows until we replaced the camera system with something that would allow me to do that better in a digital way. But PTZ cameras, you got to consider the privacy angle as well. What else can you see? Can you see neighboring properties, neighboring houses? Can you look into other people's windows with them? This is a real problem, especially when you get into, applications where there's a neighborhood nearby, right? A lot of small factories, a lot of retail complexes behind them are apartment complexes or housing units. And if the cameras are up high enough and they're good enough PTZs, you're going to be able to look and invade people's privacy. And you don't want that. So when cameras are installed, that's one of the first things you want to do. And fixed cameras don't normally give you that problem, but PTZs definitely do. So PTZ or fixed, big decision. It's really what you need to see. What is the task and purpose? If it's to cover a big parking lot, then a PTZ is your way to go. If it's to cover a certain door or a certain item within that parking lot, then a fixed would give you the absolute confidence that the camera was pointed in the right direction at the right time. Briefly, let's talk about digital enhancement. And you see this on TV all the time. You'll see a picture of a car pulling out of a parking lot, and the camera is up on a 18-story building looking down at the parking lot, and someone will inevitably say, hey, blow that up, get me that license plate number. And all of a sudden you see this zoom thing go in and this crystal clear license plate number come through, and they say, aha, and they get their man, and then they go to commercial. Okay, all VSS systems are currently pixel based. Now, think about pixels. They are individual little dots of light. And when you blow them up and blow them up and blow them up, they get something called pixelated, right? The picture gets distorted. The little squares of light just become little squares. And so the more you blow up an image, the more those pixels get distorted. You can't indefinitely blow up an image and not get that pixelation, not without some form of analytics that may help you to read a license plate number at a distance, but those are not generally built into any camera. TV lies. Okay, you can't just blow up an image and get this crystal clear. As you blow up an image, it gets grainier, it gets pixelated, and it gets very hard to read. And generally speaking, unless you have a license plate reader, right, a camera that's designed to do that at a close enough range, you're not going to be able to blow up something and really make out a license plate number from a long distance. Not any more than you'd be able to see, perhaps with the naked eye, maybe with a low-level binocular to try to blow it up just a little bit. But for the most part, every time you blow up an image, it gets more pixelated. So you have to match your camera to your task. Again, if your task was to read license plates of people going out of that parking lot, then that camera up on the 18th floor hanging off the building wasn't the right one for that task. You needed a separate camera down low in the parking lot area pointed toward the exits that was close enough when enhanced slightly to pick up those images. So digital enhancement, yeah, it's cool. Yeah, it looks really good on TV. Don't believe that crap. It doesn't work that way. It's not that accurate unless you have the analytics built into your software to enhance it so that it does that. So be very careful when you start to install cameras about what your expectations are and what the expectations are of others as far as digital enhancement. So we talked a little bit about lighting, and some lighting will distort colors. Always be wary of colors recorded at night on a camera. There's a lot of factors that can change the look of colors, especially at night. The lighting, reflections, all kinds of things. So, when you see a camera image at night and you say that person's wearing a blue jacket, it could very well be a black jacket, but your coloring on your monitor can be slightly off. There's a lot of factors. Like I said, old housings had both color and black and white cameras in them for a reason, because at night they just went to black and white and didn't take the chance that they would misidentify. But infrared is still the best option because it can light the camera view without lighting the room or area. So the infrared will, just like night vision goggles, using a different technology, but same principle, will make the camera look like you've got daylight hours when actually the area is still pitch black. It doesn't light up the area, it just lights up the image. I'm not going to go too much into the technical side of that, but when you put an infrared on a camera, it doesn't light the area so that everybody can see to walk around in it. It still may be very dark, but the infrared will essentially just light for your camera. So you have to make sure that your lighting is right for your cameras, or you have to use infrareds and expect that you're going to have some color distortion. So you also have to concern yourself with weather. Indoor cameras, use them indoors. Outdoor cameras are the only ones to install outdoors. I've seen people that will take an indoor rated camera, and put it outside because it's under an overhang. And, it's generally protected. I have seen people use them on loading docks, right? If it's a recessed dock where, there's an awning that sticks out, they'll put an indoor camera because they're cheaper underneath there. They tend to fog. They tend to have humidity problems, and the cameras will fail. Outdoor cameras generally need a heater in cold and wet areas, or they will use a dehumidifier, small dehumidifier right in the camera housing that essentially takes the moisture out, blows it out for you, and the heater will keep that dome from fogging up. But an inside camera should be used inside and an outside camera outside. Don't try to get cheap. Even though the indoor cameras are much cheaper, don't try to get cheap and put one on the outside of your industrial building. You will be disappointed. And insulate your connections. Network cables, Ethernet cables, are seldom weatherproof, and I don't mean that they're going to freeze, but if you look at Ethernet cables, they tend to have a very thin rubber housing over them. Protect them because they get banged around. Weather doesn't help them any. They move in the wind. So make sure you're protecting your cables as well in bad weather. So indoor cameras, indoors, outdoor cameras, outdoors. When you design cameras for your warehouse, make sure that you are distinguishing between the two. And before we move on to the control equipment for these things, let's talk a little bit about field of view. I have seen camera images that, especially outdoor camera images, and you look at them and you see a parking lot, and in the screen, the top 60% of the screen is the sky. It's the horizon. I doubt very highly that you installed cameras so that you would watch for planes. Okay. How much sky and how much ceiling do you really want to see? If you see too much sky and you see too much ceiling, then you're better off moving your camera to a closer location so that you're only taking in that parking lot or that building exterior or that area where you have a priority resource that you want to see. Try to limit the areas that are just not useful to you, and most of the time that is sky. Right? We have a camera that we see, and it's got the city, and on 60% of the top is this big blue sky, and it's pretty to look at, but it's not doing you any good. And all it's doing is just making everything else look smaller. Get a little closer, get in tighter, and really look at what you want to look at. Consider overlap. Oftentimes when you put cameras in, those three we saw on the pole there, I'm sure there was considerable overlap. I could stand in one place and be seen on two cameras. Never a good idea. Why would you need that? Maybe you want to have different angles and you want to come at it from another side so the person could be seen, or you could see something from two different angles. But oftentimes you will see two cameras on the same pole that have overlap. Only see an area once, right? The digital fisheye lens, which you'll see in the videos, allows you to watch a really wide area with just one lens. So I would consider those for field of view because they give you a huge field of view for one camera location. But just remember, anything extra you see is just a distraction. If it's not something that's in your task and purpose, then ask yourself, do I really need to see this? And if I don't, then I'm going to reposition my camera so I only see the things that I really need to see. And if I decide, I need that blue sky for some reason because planes are a threat to me, then you can incorporate it and you can change your task and purpose. But always go back to your task and purpose and say, am I seeing clearly how much can I do to get tighter of an image, take out all the extra stuff on the top and the bottom and the sides that I don't need to see so I can really get narrowed in on my task and purpose stuff. That's the proper positioning for a camera. So now we've pretty much decided we're going to put a camera somewhere, and we have some basics as to what type of camera we might want to use, and we're still going to learn about those. But now we have to send the images somewhere. The camera's sitting there and it's taking these pictures, right? Taking this video, and it's coming down a wire or a cable or some type of communication. Could be wireless in some cases, although that's tough to do these days. But they have to go somewhere, right? So that you can view them later. So the head-end equipment for a video system is really evolved just as cameras have. The very early systems held the film inside, right? They had a spool inside, and they used this silver coated tape, right? It was actually had silver in the I won't even call it a tape. I'll call it the reel, right? It was a reel-to-reel movie reel inside, and it went from one spool to the other. And when it was done, you took it out and put a new one in. The VCR really changed the game, but originally without the multiplexer, the VCR, you had to have one VCR for every camera. So that room I saw in GlaxoSmithKline was full of video recorders because every camera they had on this huge campus, and it was their headquarters and still is their headquarters. At the time, they all had to have a VCR. So they had a camera that was powered, and they ran a single coax cable all the way back to this room. And in some cases, that was very, very long distance. They had to have boosters in them and everything else. And then they ran it to the back of a VCR, and they taped that camera, and they did that for every single camera in there. Really not an efficient way. The multiplexer allowed that to change so that you could put, at one point, I think you had a 16-point multiplexer for a VCR, so you could put 16 cameras on one tape and record all 16 at the same time, and then play them back one at a time. But there were some issues with those as well. So here you have one of those basic old systems, and you will still see these occasionally at the the local gas stations or convenience stores, in small towns. Where you have a single camera, goes to a VCR, being taped, and then you have a monitor that you plug in. And in those old systems, this would be a TV set essentially, and you would be able to then run the tape back, pushing buttons on here, run the tape back and look at it. No enhancement really, no digitization to worry about because it wasn't digital at all, it was analog. You watched what was recorded on the VCR and which came from the camera. Very simple. This was a CCTV system because it was closed. You couldn't get to it from outside, couldn't watch this stuff on your internet connection or on your cell phone or anything like that. All a closed loop, single tape, single camera, very expensive. For the day because you had to have one of each, right, for everything. In fact, you only had one input for a cable on your monitor because it was normally a TV set. So if you wanted to put in two cameras, essentially you had to have more than one TV. So very inefficient, but really was a bit of a game changer for business because it allowed you to use cameras for security purposes. So what were the downsides? Obviously, again, the one camera for one VCR. The tapes filled up, and you had to change them. You could put them on a loop that they would record over themselves, at least the later models of these things. But for the most part, the tapes filled up, and every day you changed the tape and you used a new tape. The time date stamps were a problem. The VCRs have a time date stamp in them, and it would show up on the recording so that it would show that, the person came in with a gun on the 21st of March in 1995 at 10 p.m. and stuck a gun in the cashier's face. Unfortunately, nobody ever kept up with the time date stamps. If the thing got unplugged, it would go back to just like in the old days, people used to say your VCR went to 0000, right? 12 o'clock, and it flashed until you reset the clock, right? When your digital alarm clock, if you still have one of those old things around, you lose power, it goes to 12 o'clock and it flashes. Same thing happened to these time date stamps. They were never right. And in these cases, with these, normally when it would get unplugged or there was a power loss, it would go to 1/1 of 01, meaning 1901 actually, that, back then. And 12 o'clock, and then it would start. You didn't have to reset it. It would just start. So you always had the wrong date and time. And court cases were definitely won and lost because of the time date stamps. You said the guy came in on, March 21st of 1995. Why does the clock tell us that it's 6 a.m. on the 3rd of January in 1901, before this unit was ever invented? Well, the time date stamp is wrong. Well, then your whole case could be wrong. Closed system, somebody could steal the whole thing. If I broke into your jewelry store and you had one of these systems in it, and at night I took all the jewelry, I just had to take the VCR with me, and I had everything. There was no backup to anything. There was no cloud that this was going to. It was all contained in that box. And if you knew where the box was, a smart thief would take everything in sight and that box. They did have protection so you couldn't shut them off. You had to push a combination of numerical keypad to shut them off and to turn them back on again so that people couldn't mess with them and shut the tape off and do things. But they would just take it with them. And then you'd have nothing. And quite frankly, most of these systems were ignored right after they were put in. They were put in, they went on a loop, and nobody checked them for years because there wasn't an incident. And if there was, they went back and found out that the time date stamp was wrong, or the tape had busted and hadn't worked for a long time, or the camera itself was bad. It went bad and nobody ever fixed it. So they really were ignored. They were more of a deterrent factor than they were a detection factor. So then came the digital video recorder, which is really, a big change in the technology, because you could connect multi-cameras to the single recorder. The multiplexer was built into it. So you would have these 3 cameras coming back over coax cable, analog cameras, into this digital video recorder. You would generally, because you didn't change your cameras out, right? You still had the old ones from your VCR days, and you had a translator in here that digitized it and put it on here. Then it split it into 3, and you had 3 cameras on this screen. You could watch them all at one time. Really high tech for the day. You also notice, however, that these digital video recorders were not on the network, so you had to watch them from the monitor. And these weren't, these were a big step up from the VCR, but they definitely had their imperfections. One of the big problems were that people tended to play them back for a while on the original monitors they had, or on very small monitors. So let's just say you had a 16 or 32 cameras at that point coming into that digital recording device. Security managers wanted to watch everything, so they multiplexed all of them onto a screen. And the poor guy who was assigned to watch the cameras was watching a 19-inch TV screen with 16 cameras on it. Basically, you'd see that things were moving all over the place, but there was no way the brain could register what they were looking at. And the security managers, being who they were, thought that if I have 16 cameras, I darn well better be looking at all of them. And so they didn't think to just say some cameras can be recorded, others need to be watched. They didn't build any alarms or events into them. They just asked people to watch every camera multiplexed into little tiny squares on too small of a screen. The systems were certainly more expensive. A DVR, when they first came out, were thousands of dollars. Now you can get them much cheaper than that for your home if you wanted one. Although I don't know why you would in this day and age, but they still sell them. But many small users just dropped their systems, right? They stuck with the old VCR, or they just said, I'm not investing in this. Let's just not use cameras in our store, right? Our family business, we just won't do it. And still required dedicated wiring from the camera to the DVR. You couldn't use any existing wiring that you had in your building to run these things. And pulling wire, as we know, is very expensive. So they had their downside, but we're a step up now. We went from a very expensive, very closed system to one where we could at least put multiple cameras into a single unit and get a multiplex version of it out. Then we move up to the network video recorder, which is where you guys probably came in, right? And it's about the same. You could run it over coax cable, but you could also use existing network cable in your building to run it back. And this is essentially a hard drive. It's a server. And the big change in this is that you could hook it then to the network and view this from anywhere. So these types of systems are very common today. This is the NVR, the network video recorder, and somebody sitting in another city, someone sitting with the host of your access control system, can now sit with and watch your video as well. and watch the two of them together. And when an alarm comes in, we can watch the video of what's going on, right? All just the remote host and the remote networked video can all be taken to another place. That's the big difference between a DVR and an NVR. And it's a huge difference from a manpower perspective and being able to watch stuff remotely. And of course, once it's on the network, it can be wireless. I can watch cameras on my cell phone just as you can, pop up, the camera for downtown anywhere in the U.S. right now, and just about any place you'll be able to watch a live camera of downtown. You'll be able to watch the pandas at the National Zoo, and you'll be able to watch the lions or the tigers at LSU. They're the mascot. Anytime, day or night, you can pop it open. You can watch it. That's just going through an NVR and out to the network in an open sense so that anybody can watch. In your case, for security purposes, you would have it in a closed system so only certain people had permissions to use the network to watch your cameras. But still, there's a downside, right? There's a lot of dedicated wires here. A lot of stuff connected by wire. There's a dedicated box to hold a video, that NVR, and that NVR is, depending on the size of the unit, can run anywhere from installed around $9,000 to upwards of $90,000 if you have redundant systems so that you don't miss anything. They're not cheap for good industrial ones, and it's still a box you have to have. They have limited memory. The memory is contained in that server. That NVR is a server. It's a computer. It's a server. And you can put, 4 terabytes of memory in it and hold a lot of video, but it is still limited by how much memory you have in that box, and then you need to overwrite or you need to take information off. If you need to take information off to save it, if you have to retain a year's worth of video for some business purpose, and your 4 terabyte server, your NVR, only holds 60 days of video because you've got so many cameras hooked to it, you're going to have to archive it physically to a removable media of some kind. Be it you can put it on a DVD, you can put it on a data stick, you could back it up to a separate cloud, but in this case, these are on the network, and the box holds the information. And these systems aren't always optimized for bandwidth, and so trying to move stuff over the network sometimes can get a little clunky because you can get all this great equipment and all the memory you want, and you put it on the network, but your network isn't very good. And then when you try to view it from someplace else, you're going to get video loss. You're going to get clunky. It's like Netflix when you just don't have a great connection and it keeps cutting in and out at you. They're very bit dependent on bandwidth. Which brings us to onboard recording systems, which are continuing to get more popular all the time. The power for the cameras and for everything really comes over the Ethernet. So when you plug in your camera, you don't plug it into an electric outlet and then a cable into it. You just plug it into a network port, right? The old, where you plug your computer into the wall for a desktop, right? Instead of using wireless, although you could use even a wireless. But they get their power from the internet itself, right? From the internet wire. Okay, for lack of a better term. They're an IoT device. They're an Internet of Things device. They have direct connection. You can put them on, and it just takes, it's like setting up an Echo Dot or a Google Home, or, setting up, again, your Roku or something on your TV. You just put them on, and everything gets set up over the internet. They have onboard recording. So instead of going to that server in that NVR, the camera itself holds its own individual recorder. It may go on an SD card, the little card that you'd put into like a digital camera, right, for memory. Or in some cases, there are brands that have an onboard computer it's a little server, if you will, that holds all the data. And some of them can hold up to, I've seen them hold up to a year worth of video on the camera itself. And you simply go out through your computer and you ask for that camera by its IP address. It is an individual computer, and you go there and you view all your video that way. For monitoring purposes, whoever's sitting in your monitoring room or your host, which is somewhere outside your facility, they just go to that address and look at that camera from wherever, and they can multiplex several of them onto the screen, much bigger screens these days. But the big difference is there's no box here that you have to pay for. Everything is held in the camera. Now, that sounds like a better way to go. You've eliminated expensive hardware. You've got power and everything being held out here, and you can watch it from anywhere in the world. We're getting really a lot better, sort of. But in the case of the NVR, you can password protect that. And no one's really going that's where the images go, and that's where they're stored. And if it's password protected, and it's protected behind your firewall, it's very unlikely anybody's going to get to your video. When you're storing the video at the camera level, then you have individual boxes, and you may have 100 cameras at your facility, or 200, or 1,000, depending on the size and the mission of your employer. And each one of those cameras then holds information. It's not just transmitting it back to that other box where it's held, so you have to password protect each one. Each camera needs its own cyber protection. Now, each camera can also stand alone. So if you're using an SD card, or you have it on, you're recording everything on the camera, if one camera goes out, the rest of them are still absolutely recording. If that NVR went out, then none of them would record, right? So you have the backup. Each one of them backs up its own information all by itself. It's self-contained. And if you don't have an internet connection, you can still use that onboard recording. You just record it onto an SD card, and you've got an abandoned facility. You put the camera in, you put the SD card in, you power it up, and if you needed to go back, you just pull that card out and physically look at it. But there's some benefits to all of this, and then there's a huge downside, which I hope you picked up on this week from one of the videos. So you're holding a ton of video at the camera end, right? It's right there when you need it, and you just hop on the internet and put in you actually hop onto an interface, and you don't even have to put in the IP address. You just request the camera by name, click on it, and boom, up it pops. 30 days of motion sensing images is usually enough. But in fact, I said most hold less. Actually, most hold more. Some of the high-end models can hold a couple of years worth of video, or over at least a year of motion sense video. So it only really records when something's moving in front of it. If it's just a camera image of a wall, why would you want to record that? You only want to record it when somebody walks in front of it, right? So it's very easy to hold a lot of data. That SD card can be removed, and you have a piece of evidence you can take for legal review. If you're on the network with it, right, and you're able to view it, you're not just using the SD card, but you're actually going and looking at it over the internet, you can actually enable patches and security updates and change passwords and everything from wherever you are in the world. So if there's a security vulnerability that's found with the camera, you can automatically just go out there and boom, download software right to the camera itself, and it's protected again. And you can archive this stuff to the cloud. So if you want to store it on the camera and you've got it stored there, and you say, okay, I want to store 30 days worth on the camera, so I always have it, and then I'm going to archive the rest of it to the cloud, you can set that up, and then you can go to the cloud, put in permissions, look for the dates you want, and go look at archive video. Everything is networked. This isn't news to you guys at all, but because cameras are so much still in their infancy, the fact that this stuff can be networked and stored on a cloud is really new technology to a lot of security managers, and that is why they make some big mistakes with it. And as you saw from looking at one of the videos, this very short one from CBS News on, they said Verkada, it's actually Verkada, if you're talking to the salespeople, they had a big problem. Because each one of those cameras holds the data, each one of them has to be password protected. As I said, in the old days, or even the ones that are in use now, NetVRs, you protect that box. That's where the information is. You protect the one password, right? It's protected. With the onboard recording, those cameras as edge devices, you have to protect each one with its own password. When people installed those cameras, they did not change the passwords. There's a default password, just like there's a default password on everything that you buy, right? And then Apple makes you sign in and put in your own password, right? When you get a new iPhone, it fires up, it still comes on, and it says, welcome, and it talks you through how to download your old information off your old phone and everything. Well, that's because there's a default password in there that allowed that to happen. And then at some point, Apple says you need to put in your Apple ID and your Apple password, and then it updates to the new password. These cameras will work perfectly well with the default password that comes with the camera set at the factory, all the same for every model of camera, and the installer puts it up and he hooks it up and never changes the password. And the person who's the end user and the security manager doesn't think about it and never changes the password. And all of those are like computers without any virus protection on them. And if you watch the CBS News article, 300,000 cameras were compromised in one day. and views of insides of prisons and hospitals and schools and factories, including all of Tesla's facilities who are using this brand of camera and this style of recording, were available on the internet so you could watch anybody's cameras, because the cameras are often the forgotten piece. It sits on the edge, nobody worries about it, but when you're recording at the camera level, when you're using that new edge recording, that's where all the data is, and that's what's got to be protected. So it's a big problem with those, and it became a very big problem for this company, which probably will not be in business a year from now. So we're at an hour, and I'm going to rush through this. So some things to do. Go to the Axis Communications website. Look, they're not the only camera maker in town by any stretch. And I also have a video of a Panasonic one, which I think it does a great job of explaining the fisheye and the dewarping process. But I want you to look at Axis's website and just go through some of the models, look at some of the very short videos they have and what they do, because you're going to use their cameras for our warehouse. And the reason I'm using their cameras above anybody else's is because I'm familiar with them, for one. And number two, if we used everybody else's cameras, I'd have to go and get the prices on everybody else's cameras when we do our budgeting exercise. So this is not an endorsement. I am a user of Axis cameras, and I like them. I also have some Panasonics and some Sonys in the field. There are some brands we'll talk about next week that you'll never want to use because they have very, very poor cybersecurity on them, and I will call them out by name so that you don't make that mistake when you get in that first job. But this is not an endorsement of Axis, only using them because I'm very familiar with them, and they have all the different types of cameras that we'll need for our project. So go to their website, take a look at the different models, play around with the videos on it, and just see what you might think might fit our warehouse. A couple of takeaways that I want you to think about. Next week, we're going to look at the application of the cameras. So we're actually going to look at what type of camera would we put in which area of our warehouse and why, and other facilities besides our warehouse. I want you to promise to never say CCTV unless you mean it. These are VSS systems, right? Correct people in the field politely, because CCTV is a closed circuit television system. These aren't closed circuit. They're available on the network. You can look at the stuff on the network. They are not closed. So they are VSS. Couple of things that I didn't mention, but you will find fake cameras in use. You buy them cheap. There's also something called a lick and stick. It is stickers that go on the door that say video surveillance in use, or some alarm system company in use, and all you paid for was the sticker. You didn't buy the cameras and you didn't buy the alarm. You just put the sticker on the door. Don't ever, ever, ever do that, because think about the liability. When somebody gets hurt and they say, I need the video, and you say, oh, that's a fake camera, you are in a world of hurt. Protect your cameras with their password at the NVR, but also even with those cameras that don't collect data at their end, they still have a password on them. Use passwords. It's just smart. People can't get into your system in any way, shape, or form if you use passwords. And remember that video is not a miracle cure. People tend to think that you're on camera everywhere you go, and I've heard people say that, well, everywhere you go, you're on a camera. That's not even close to true. Sure, there are places where, you're going to be on camera a lot of the places you go. I walk from 42nd Street and 2nd Avenue to Times Square. I am probably being picked up on cameras most of the way. But when I go into Brooklyn or Bronx and I'm walking around the street, I'm probably not. In downtown Slippery Rock, you're going to get picked up by a camera every couple hundred feet because somebody has a Ring doorbell, or somebody has a security camera on their front porch, or a business has one that happens to be pointing out the window and shows you walking by. But you're probably not on a camera every place you walk in Slippery Rock Borough. Even on campus, I don't think the cameras, although you have a very impressive video system there, and I'll talk about it next week because I've talked to the chief of police, and it's really a cool system. There are even places on campus, as you know, that you're not on camera. There are a lot of them, but you're not 100% covered. Make sure you manage that expectation with your employees and with your boss that not everything is covered. You're covering the things that you have a task and purpose to cover. So, reading this week, more reading than normal, but again, this is a pretty easy book. You'll crank that out in 20 minutes tops. And some of the material is already old because things move fast in technology, but it gives you good basics on cameras. Look at the videos that I put in there. Some of them are short. I think the longest one is 8 minutes, but that 8-minute one from Panasonic I think is really good to describe the fisheye, which I think some of you are going to want to use in your design. It's up to you. Look at the Axis website. Go to axis.com. we're going to use those cameras for our projects simply because I'll understand what model numbers you're talking about and what the capabilities are, so that we don't have to go to 1,000 different. When you get out in the field, you use anybody that you think that gives you a valuable product. Look at the different product lines: fixed cameras, bullet cameras, PTZs, 360s, fisheyes. Just look at a couple of different ones, run a couple of videos on them. They're very short videos on the capabilities, so you can get a feel for it. There's a discussion this week. You're going to go out and take more pictures for me. I think that, just about everybody has said that they thought that was a pretty easy assignment, but it also shows me that you're aware of the different things we're looking for, and I think it does give you some awareness. Even looking at doorknobs, you're not looking at doorknobs the same way you did before you started this class, and you also are getting more cognizant about alarm systems when you look at doors, when you walk through them. This week we're going to take pictures of cameras. We're going to take pictures of picture-taking things and different types, and you're going to post them, and we're going to discuss them a little bit. There's a discussion, initial one due Thursday with responses due on Sunday, just like normal. With that, have a great and healthy week. I apologize I went long this time, but cameras really excite me, and there's just so much to cover. But next week we're going to get to the point where we start to plot them onto our drawings, and so I want you familiar with some of the features, and that's kind of what we're doing this week. Have a great week, and I will see you on campus.